He reached for the display with quiet curiosity, his fingers stopping inches from the glass. A modest man in a beige hoodie and well-worn cap, his eyes lingered on a delicate necklace nestled among diamonds. He didn't say much, just stood there like someone admiring stars through a window he'd never open. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away," said the woman behind the counter, her voice sharp, her hand already raised like a stop sign. Behind her, a security guard had begun to approach. The man blinked, startled. I was just looking," he said gently. "We don't allow loitering, especially not here," she added, her eyes scanning his clothes with a look that said, "For everything." A silence fell over the store. The customers nearby pretended not to watch, but their glances were loud. Embarrassed, the man nodded slowly. "Right, sorry." As he turned to leave, the security guard didn't touch him, but he didn't have to. The man's shoulders did all the shrinking for him. His steps echoed across the marble floor. He didn't protest. He didn't explain. He just left. What no one saw was the way his hand trembled slightly as he reached for the door, or how his eyes lingered one last time on that necklace, just long enough to remember it. 10 minutes later, everything changed. Security radios lit up across the floor. 2 guards whispered quickly near the entrance. A soft command was given. Within seconds, customers were asked to leave. "Routine check," they were told. Employees looked around nervously as a group of private security officers arrived in suits, speaking discreetly into earpieces. The floor was cleared, and then a woman stepped inside. Not just any woman. She walked with the precision of someone used to being followed, and she was. Behind her came 2 individuals in discreet black suits, one of them carrying a small velvet case. She headed straight for the same counter. "Where is your manager?" she asked calmly. The same clerk from earlier stood frozen. Her voice faltered. May I ask who you—" "I'm Elaine Granger," she interrupted, showing a discreet emblem embroidered on her sleeve. "And I believe my husband was here just minutes ago." The silence returned, but this time it was heavier. Nobody knew who the man in the hoodie was, but the building did, and it remembered everything. His name was Thomas Granger. To most people, he looked like the kind of man who fixed pipes, bagged groceries, or maybe worked nights at a quiet storage facility. No one ever guessed that behind his soft eyes and faded hoodie lived a man who had built something far greater than wealth. Years ago, after watching his father battle loneliness in a neglected nursing home, Thomas had made a promise. Not just to his father, but to everyone like him. That promise became the Living Horizon Foundation, an initiative that quietly transformed abandoned clinics into warm, welcoming mental health centers for the elderly. He never spoke much about it, but his hands had painted the walls, planted the gardens, and even designed the therapy rooms to resemble cozy kitchens instead of sterile institutions. He once drove through a blizzard just to hand-deliver a modified wheelchair to a man named Eli, a retired train conductor who had been living behind a laundromat. "You didn't have to do this," Eli had whispered, choking back tears. Thomas had only smiled. "Yeah, but someone should have a long time ago." But none of that mattered in the jewelry store. To them, he was just another middle-aged man, in clearance rack clothes, possibly killing time while his wife shopped elsewhere. The world saw what it wanted to see. In his neighborhood, Thomas was known simply as Tom. He helped fix leaky roofs without asking for money, brought groceries to a widow down the street, and left handwritten notes of encouragement on the doors of neighbors going through hard times. He didn't want attention. In fact, he avoided it. Not out of shyness, but out of belief. He believed that kindness was strongest when it didn't ask for applause, but even the kindest hearts bruise. After the incident at the store, he sat in the food court alone with a coffee he didn't really want and a muffin that tasted like cardboard. He stared at nothing for a while, then at his hands, then at the people walking by. None of them knew who he was, and for a brief moment, he wished he didn't either. "What am I even doing here?" he thought. "This place smells like perfume and pretense. Maybe I should have worn that blue shirt, the one without the hole under the arm." He let out a soft laugh, almost amused by his own foolishness. "She said I didn't belong here, maybe she's right." But then he remembered something. A letter, folded neatly in his wallet, from a girl named Miriam, age 12, who'd written to thank the foundation for helping her grandfather smile again before he passed. She'd drawn a sunflower next to her name. He took a deep breath. Maybe the world didn't see him. But he saw them, and that had always been enough. Days passed. The incident at the jewelry store might have been forgotten by others, but not by Amelia, the new employee who had watched the whole thing unfold from the far end of the counter. She remembered the look on his face, not just confusion or shame, but something quieter, a kind of exhaustion that made her stomach turn. It stuck with her. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the scene, the way he had whispered, "Sorry," even though he had done nothing wrong. The way he'd looked at the necklace just once, like he wasn't thinking of himself at all. The next morning, she searched the store's footage again, watched it in silence. Something in her chest tightened. That's when she started asking questions. She didn't know his name yet, but something about the way he walked, it didn't match the clothes. There was patience in his steps, control. She'd seen that before, on her grandfather, a retired surgeon who had sewn up lives with steady hands and never raised his voice. Meanwhile, Thomas kept moving as always. One evening, he quietly left an envelope at the front desk of a rundown community center across town. Inside was a check, enough to repair the roof and fund after-school programs for 6 months. No name, no return address, just a post-it note, for the kids who deserve more light. Another day, he helped a neighbor install a stair lift for her husband, who had recently returned from the hospital. "You don't have to do this," she insisted. Thomas smiled and replied, "But I know what it's like to feel stuck." None of it made headlines. No one clapped, but slowly something began to shift. Amelia, curious now, overheard a conversation between 2 elderly customers at the cafe near the store. One of them mentioned a man, Tom Granger, who had built a center that saved her sister from deep depression. Amelia froze. The name felt familiar, but it was the face she remembered. Could it be? She did a quick search. There he was. Not on magazine covers, but in community blogs, quiet newsletters, old Facebook posts full of thanks and shaky photos, smiling beside ribbon cuttings, always a little in the background, always in that same beige hoodie. Her heart skipped. Back at the store, she stood still behind the glass cases, watching customers float by, demanding diamonds, scoffing at prices, treating her like a mannequin. And suddenly everything felt loud and hollow. She began leaving small notes of kindness inside the jewelry boxes, just words like "you matter" or "there's more to life than sparkle." It wasn't policy, but she didn't care. Thomas never knew, and he never would have asked. But the world had started to notice, slowly, silently, like the first drop of rain before a storm. At first glance, nothing changed. Thomas still walked the same streets, wore the same scuffed shoes, greeted the same bakery clerk who never remembered his name. He held doors open, returned lost wallets, picked up grocery bags for strangers on rainy days. But people rarely looked twice, until one Sunday morning. It started with a bench. Outside the community library, a man had passed out from heat exhaustion. No one noticed. People stepped around him, assuming he was drunk or dangerous. But Thomas saw him. He shaded the man with his own jacket, gave him water, and waited silently for help to arrive. No one recognized him, except for the librarian. She had once received an anonymous donation, enough to keep the library open for another year. A note had come with it, written in pen. "Books save more than minds." She watched as Thomas walked away that day after the ambulance had left, and something in her stirred. Later that week, she reopened the envelope. Same handwriting. Elsewhere, small moments piled up. A single mother found a toy set left on her porch with a note, "Because James deserves to build." A local vet was surprised to find a new heating system installed anonymously, paid in full. An older man at the bus stop realized the stranger who always gave up his seat had also left a package of warm gloves behind. One by one, these moments began to intersect. No one connected them to Thomas, not yet. But people began to whisper about someone out there who still believed in decency, someone who acted with precision and grace and never left a name. Meanwhile, at the jewelry store, Amelia had started changing in small ways too. She began asking customers different questions, not just about budgets or preferences, but about meaning. "What does this piece say about who you love?" she'd ask. "What feeling do you want to remember when you wear this?" It made the other staff roll their eyes at first. But clients responded, some cried, some stayed longer, and Amelia, without even realizing it, was reflecting Thomas's quiet sincerity. One night she stayed late to clean the showroom. Alone with her thoughts, she whispered, "Who are you?" into the empty room, remembering the man in the hoodie. She didn't know the answer, but she had started to care, and that changed everything. The cafe near the mall had been unusually busy that week. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe the city was just more restless lately. But amid the noise, a soft moment unfolded. An elderly man named Walter ordered a coffee, but realized at the counter he'd forgotten his wallet. Embarrassed, he tried to explain, fumbling through his pockets. Before the barista could respond, someone behind him quietly placed a $10 bill on the counter. "No need to rush," said the voice. Walter turned to thank the stranger, but the man in the hoodie was already walking away. Later that day, the barista found another envelope in the tip jar. Inside was enough money to buy free drinks for every senior customer for the rest of the month. The note read, "Kindness should never come with a receipt." The barista, a young man named Devin, pinned the note to the wall. "Whoever this is," he said, "they're the reason I want to do better." Elsewhere, at a park across town, a group of children found their broken swing set mysteriously repaired overnight. The screws were tightened, the chains replaced. A fresh coat of paint turned rust into laughter. The parents assumed the city had done it. They were wrong, and one of them, a social worker named Lara, found a folded paper in her mailbox 2 days later. It was a sketch of the swing set, drawn in careful detail. At the bottom, a message: "Every child deserves one moment that feels like flying." She stared at the drawing for a long time. That afternoon, she looked through her files and found one name that appeared faintly in the donation records of several orphanage projects she'd worked on: T. Granger. Back at the jewelry store, Amelia noticed something else. One of the cleaning staff, a woman named Neera, had found a wrapped gift near her cart with her name on it. Inside was a pair of warm gloves and a photo of a sunrise. "Hope looks like this," the note read. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She had seen that handwriting before. It matched the donation letter she'd received the month prior when she'd raised money for her niece's surgery. The anonymous donor had covered the final $3,000 gap, just in time. She thought she'd never know who it was, but now she began piecing things together, slowly. Not with certainty, but with wonder. No one had officially revealed Thomas Granger. No spotlight had found him, but people were beginning to feel his fingerprints on the world, and in quiet corners, in cafes, in parks, in retail stores and schoolyards. He was no longer just a man in a hoodie. He was a reminder that something better was possible, that maybe someone out there still moved through life not to be seen, but to make others feel visible. And for those who paid attention, the mystery was no longer if he mattered. It was how much they'd missed while looking the other way. It began with a whisper, one too persistent to ignore. Amelia sat in the break room of the jewelry store, scrolling through local community posts. A post caught her eye. "To the man in the hoodie who fixed the swings, you made my daughter believe in magic again." Her heart skipped. That sketch, the handwriting. She'd seen it. She got up, heart pounding, and opened the employee drawer where she had hidden a copy of the donation note for her niece's surgery. She placed the two side by side. Same slant, same pressure, same quiet presence behind the ink. That's when she knew. It wasn't just a kind stranger. It was him, the man who'd been humiliated in her store. Amelia didn't know what to do at first. Apologies felt too small. Explanations felt hollow. But then, the news came in like a lightning strike. Elaine Granger, philanthropist, CEO, and one of the most respected women in medicine, had requested a private showing at their store, with security measures in place. The store buzzed into overdrive. Employees scrambled. Security checked entrances. The manager rehearsed greetings. No one breathed normally. And then, at exactly 2:30, the elevator doors opened. Elaine entered, commanding yet calm. Behind her, Thomas. Same hoodie, same posture. But this time, the atmosphere shifted for him. Every employee who had once glanced past him now turned fully to look. He walked with quiet certainty. And in that moment, Amelia didn't see a man who had been denied service. She saw the thread that had stitched her community back together. Elaine approached the counter. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I believe your team had a moment with my husband," she said, placing a velvet case on the glass. The manager stuttered. We didn't realize." "You didn't need to realize," she interrupted. "You only needed to respect." Then she opened the box. Inside, a custom-made sapphire necklace. Priceless. "I'm not here to buy," she said softly. "I'm here to donate. This is for your next charity auction." In Thomas's name. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't shame, it was reverence. Thomas didn't speak. Not because he was angry, but because he knew the silence now spoke for him. He looked at Amelia briefly, not with accusation, but recognition, as if to say, "I know you see me now," she did. And in that moment her chest tightened, not with guilt but gratitude. As they turned to leave, the staff stood like statues. The manager, cheeks pale, called out feebly, "Mr. Granger, we would like to—" Thomas stopped. He didn't turn back. He simply said, "Treat the next one better," and walked out. Outside the store, the air was lighter. Elaine reached for his hand. "You didn't have to come, you know." "I know," he replied. "But someone had to stand where I fell." Back inside, Amelia began something quietly radical. She wrote a short note and placed it in the back room. "He taught us more in silence than our training ever did." Word spread. The plaque with Thomas's name was mounted next to the necklace, which sparkled behind glass not as a product but as a lesson. The inscription read, "To the man whose value could not be priced." The community started asking questions. Was it really him? The one who funded the youth shelter? Who fixed the school's heating? Who saved the library? The answer came not in confirmations but in stories. Stories that echoed in coffee shops, in bus rides, in homes lit by his unseen generosity. No longer invisible, Thomas had become something greater, unforgettable. The jewelry store changed, quietly, almost reluctantly. Not through rebranding or press releases, but through whispers, through pauses in conversation, through people glancing toward the plaque with Thomas Granger's name and realizing they'd missed something deeper. The staff meetings grew more personal. Empathy wasn't just a buzzword. It became the mirror they were all forced to look into. Amelia led that shift. She requested time each week to tell stories, real stories, of customers they had overlooked, of people who came in needing more than diamonds. She didn't name Thomas in every meeting. She didn't have to. His presence hovered in the air, steady as gravity. One afternoon, the same manager who had dismissed him stood in front of the staff and admitted, "I thought I was protecting the brand, but now I see I was protecting a barrier." Across town, Thomas kept showing up, not for interviews or praise, but for people. He returned to a woman's house to install a ramp for her father. "Didn't you already help us once?" she asked. Thomas smiled. "I like to follow up." He spoke at a local school, not as a guest, but as a surprise. A counselor had told the students someone special would be talking to them about resilience. No one expected a man in a hoodie, but when he told the story of his father, of building something from grief, of choosing compassion over bitterness, the room fell silent. Not a single phone was out, not a single child looked away, and when he finished, a boy in the front row raised his hand. "Mister, how come nobody knows who you are?" Thomas paused, then said, "Maybe they do now." Elaine noticed it first. Thomas had stopped asking, "Do I belong in places like that?" He simply entered, not to prove anything, but because he knew who he was, and in response the world stopped asking who he wasn't. At the jewelry store, a small ceremony was held, not for marketing but for meaning. They unveiled the necklace once donated in Thomas's name. It now sat in a central glass case, beneath a new inscription, a reminder that value begins where assumptions end. Amelia stood beside it, giving a short speech. Her hands trembled, her voice cracked, but her message was clear. Kindness doesn't always sparkle. Sometimes it wears a hoodie and walks past you without asking for anything. Customers clapped, not out of obligation, but understanding. And that's what changed. The people in the room no longer needed a headline to believe in someone like Thomas. They had seen too much, felt too much. Weeks later, a reporter asked Thomas if he had forgiven the store. He blinked. "There's nothing to forgive. They just hadn't met me yet." Then he looked down at his hands. "These hands built something for strangers. I can't hold grudges in the same ones." Elaine watched him from across the garden that evening. He was watering sunflowers with the same focus he gave to every act, large or small. And for a brief second, she saw not the man the world had finally acknowledged, but the one who never needed it. There's something sacred about being unseen until the world finally opens its eyes. Thomas Granger never asked for that. He didn't want applause or justice printed on banners. He only wanted to build a world where the forgotten felt remembered, where the quiet were heard, where value wasn't measured in shine but in substance. And yet, in being dismissed, he revealed more than any speech ever could. Because the truth is this: most of us walk past people like Thomas every day. We size them up, file them into silent categories. Assume the worst, or worse, assume nothing at all. But if we looked closer, we might see the calloused hands that delivered wheelchairs in the snow, the quiet notes left for strangers, the ramp, built so a man could see his garden one last time. We might realize that dignity isn't worn, it's lived, and that character doesn't demand a spotlight. It builds its own light from the inside out. This story isn't just about a man in a hoodie. It's about us, about how we see, about what we value, and about what we miss when we rush to judge. Because in the end, the man who walked out of that jewelry store didn't lose anything. He carried the same strength with him that he always had. The only thing that changed was who we became after watching him. So next time someone walks past you, quiet and unassuming, ask yourself, are you seeing a stranger, or are you missing someone unforgettable? If you thought this story was powerful, wait until you see what happened to the simple man in the next one.